Hello everyone, welcome back to another GIS mathematics lecture video. And in this lecture video, I want to go through another example of reduced row echelon form, because I think this is kind of a tricky topic to wrap your head around. And I want to make sure that we go through as many examples as possible, and I want to go through them slowly and explain what each step is doing and why we're doing it. So let's go ahead and give ourselves a little bit of space here. And let's go through another example. Okay, so in this example, let's have ourselves the following matrix. 1, 2, 1, 3, 2, 1, 1, 1, 3, 3, 2, 1. And the goal is going to be to put this into reduced row echelon form. We can quickly look and see that it is not already in reduced row echelon form because we have a leading one and there's non-zero numbers underneath it. So we have to actually do some work here. So let's walk through our steps again. The first step, figure out what column we haven't worked on. We have not worked on the first column. Figure out what row we haven't worked on. Well, we haven't worked on the first row. So because of that, this element right here is going to be our first element that we're going to work on. So the next thing we need to do is figure out how do we make it a leading one. Well, we're in luck. This is already a leading one. Okay. So then we move on to the next step. The next step is make sure that everything below it becomes 0. Okay. So how do we make this 2 a 0 given row 1? Well, we can multiply row 1 by -2 and then add them together, okay? So that's going to be -2 times row 1 times row 1 plus row 2 being placed in row 2. Right, and again, we're using row 1 to eliminate this first element in row 2. That's the goal here. Okay? So if we do that, right, we're not changing the first row. 1, 2, 1, 3. We're not changing the last row, right? 3, 3, 2, 1. Row 2 is becoming -2 times row 1 plus row 2. So 1 times -2 is -2 plus 2 is 0. Okay. 2 times -2 is -4 plus 1 is -3. Okay. 1 times -2 is -2 plus 1 is -1. And then 3 times -2 is -6 plus 1 is -5. Right, so hopefully you followed that process. Okay. So now we got to get rid of this 3. Well, to do that, we need to multiply this 1 by -3. So to do that, right, we're going to be doing -3 times row 1 plus row 3, and we're going to put those values into row 3. Okay? So let's go ahead and draw this out. All right, 1, 2, 1, 3, right? We're not changing the first row. 0, -3, -1, 5, right? We're not changing the second row anymore. And our third row is going to be -3 times row 1 plus row 3. Okay? So 1 times -3 is -3 plus 3 is going to be 0. Right? -3 times 2 is -6 plus 3 is going to be -3. 1 times -3 is going to be -3, plus 2 is going to be -1. And then 3 times negative 2 is going to be, 3 times negative 3 is going to be negative 9, plus 1 is negative 8. Right, again, if you get lost in the arithmetic here, please pause the video, go back, rewatch the step, make sure you follow along where the numbers are coming from and where they're going to, because we're changing the matrix at every step here. Okay? So we've accomplished this. We made this a leading one with zeros under it. So now we go to the next column and the next row. And we say, what do we have to do to make this negative 3 a leading one? Well, we have to multiply by negative 1/3. Right, so we're going to do negative 1/3 times row 3 is going to go into row 3. Okay. So if we do that, right, 0 times negative 3 is still 0. We're not changing the first and third row. Or sorry, this should be a 2, not a 3. We're working on the second row. We're not changing the first row. Right, we're not changing the third row. Okay, so negative 3 times negative 1/3 is 1. Negative 1 times negative 1/3 is 1/3. And 5 times negative 1/3 is going to be negative 5/3. Sorry, this should be negative 5. That's going to be 5/3. Because a negative times a negative is a positive, so this is 5/3. Okay. So now we have to make this a 0. How do we make this a 0? Well, we add to it 3 of this row, right? So now we're going to do 3 row 2 plus row 3 is going to go into row 3. Right, that's going to make this a 0. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that math. All right, 1 times 3 is 3, plus negative 3 is going to be 0. So we have a 0, we have a 0. We're not changing row 1, so that's going to be 1, 2, 1, 3. We're not changing row 2, so that's going to be 0, 1, 1/3, and 5/3. Okay, so 1/3 times 3 is 1, plus negative 1 is going to be 0. Okay, 5/3 times 3 is going to be 5, plus negative 8 is going to be negative 3. Right, again, if you got lost, if I moved too fast through the arithmetic, pause the video, figure out where these numbers were coming from, because I don't want you to get lost in the arithmetic. Okay? So now we have this leading one with a 0 underneath it. Now we go down to the right. There's not a 1 here. We keep going to the right, this negative 3. How do we make this negative 3 a 1? Well, we multiply this entire row by negative 1/3. Right, so negative 1/3 R3 goes into R3. So if we do that, right, we have 1, 2, 1, 3, because we're not messing with that row. We have a 0, a 1, a 1/3, and a 5/3. And then we have a 0, a 0, and a 0, because those don't change. Negative 3 times negative 1/3 is 1. So this is going to become 1. So we've created all of our leading ones, and we've made sure that every row below the leading one, there's a 0 in that column. So now we need to take care of the numbers above the leading ones. So let's give ourselves a little bit of room here. So this column is good, right? There's no number above this leading one. We have this one right here. How do we get rid of this 2? Well, we multiply this row by -2, right? So, and then we add it to row 1. So we're going to do -2, row 2, plus row 1 goes into row 1. Okay, so what is that going to look like? Well, we're not editing the last row. We don't have to worry about that. We're not editing the second row. Right? 0 times -2 is 0, plus 1 is 1, so that doesn't change. 1 times -2 is -2, plus 2 is 0. Right? 1/3 times -2, I'm going to actually write this out. So this piece right here is going to be -2 times 1/3, right? That's the element in row 2, plus 1. This is going to be equal to -2/3 plus 1, which is going to be equal to 1/3, right? Hopefully I didn't lose you in that step. I wanted to write that out because I know sometimes fractions can cause people a problem. I just wanted to make sure that you understood where that was coming from. Okay. So then we have this element here. So we have 5/3 times -2. That's going to be -10/3. I'm going to write this one out too. All right, -2 times 5/3 plus 3. That's going to be equal to -10/3 plus 3. So converting 3 to thirds, that's going to be the equivalent of 9/3. Right, so -10/3 plus 9/3 is going to be equal to -1/3. Okay. This matrix looks ugly. I know. That's okay. So where do we go from here? Well, we have this leading one right here. We need to get rid of this number. We need to make this a 0, and we need to make this a 0. Well, how do we make this a 0? Right, we multiply this by -5/3. So if we do -5/3 R3 plus R2 going into R2, okay, right? So because this is 0, right, all these other numbers are going to be the same. So we're going to keep our 1, our 0, our 1/3, our -1/3. We're going to keep our third row, 0, 0, 0, 1. Right, because all of these are 0, the first 3 numbers don't change. So we're going to keep our 0, 1, 1/3. 1 times -5/3 is -5/3, plus 5/3 is 0. So we're good there. Okay. And then finally, we need to get rid of this negative 1/3 up here. So how do we do that? How do we get rid of this last negative 1/3? Well, we multiply this by 1/3 and then we add it. So to do that, right, that's going to look something like this. We're going to do 1/3 times row 3 plus row 1 goes to row 1, right? So again, because these are all zeros, the first 3 elements aren't going to change. I'm going to write our final matrix down here. All right, so 1, 0, and 1/3 aren't going to change. Our entire second row is not going to change. And our entire third row is not going to change, okay? So 1 times 1/3 is 1/3, plus negative 1/3 is going to be 0. Okay, so let's take a look. Is the first non-zero element in each row a 1? Check. 0, 1, check. 0, 0, 0, 0, 1, check. If we have any rows of all zeros, or are they at the bottom? We don't have any rows of all zeros, so we're good there. Is each leading one to the right of the leading one before it? So this is a leading one, go down to the right, good. Go down to the right, good. For each column with a leading one, are there zeros in all other, or sorry, for each row with a leading one, are there zeros in every column? So this is a leading one, that's all zeros. This is a leading one, that's all zeros. These aren't leading ones, so we don't have to worry about this column. This is a leading one, that's all zeros. So this is, in fact, reduced row echelon form, okay? Hopefully that makes sense. If you have any questions, please reach out. Thank you.